Welcome everyone to our workshop on exploring information literacy and social justice. I'm so happy to have you all here today. I'm really excited for this workshop, but it's also the one that of the workshops that I've done that in some ways I feel least prepared for, just because I feel like I'm still learning. There's so much to learn still, especially in thinking about social justice. And I feel like I really haven't had a chance to explore, I've just the tip of the iceberg of the material that is out there on this topic. While I feel that there are some areas that I'm strong in, I'm hoping that that you all in the audience may have resources or comments or thoughts, ideas that you can share as well. Those of you that have been engaged in social justice work before, I would love to hear your voice in this workshop as well today. So we will go ahead. I'm going to one more time put in the chat the link to the workshop materials for today. You won't need to use the Menti poll right now, but we'll use that in a second. So we'll get started with our first little quick warm-up activity. And if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, just let me know how you're feeling today. So I've given you all some options in the slide. So from grumpy, overwhelmed, tired, good, awesome, or ready to rock. And if you're other things as well that you're feeling today that you would like to share, please feel free to add those as well. So we'll give everyone just 30 seconds. If you feel comfortable just putting in the chat how you're feeling today. Love to hear that. All right, Kathy's ready to rock. Awesome. Overwhelmed, tired, tired. Yep, definitely understand that. Ready to rock. Jenny is verging on overwhelmed, but ready to rock as well. I think that's a great attitude. Good and tired, let's rock, ready to rock. Jordan said it's gray and rainy, so blah. Amy said loves the bee. Yes, feels ready. Tired today, but ready to engage in some thinking, reflection, sharing. That's great, Tara. Brian said overwhelm will come later. Good, tired, ready to rock. Grumpy, enjoying the fall. Yeah, me too, Jean. Favorite time of year, definitely. Good, overwhelmed. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing how you all are feeling today. And then our second quick little warm-up activity is just a quick Halloween trivia. So if you know the answer to any of these, you can feel free to post your response in the chat. Question A, who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow? Question B, what was candy corn originally called? C, what is the name of the song that was a graveyard smash? And D, Halloween is sometimes referred to by other names, including, and this actually there's a couple different responses that you can give here. So we'll give everyone a chance to respond in the chat if you are comfortable. All right, so let's see our responses coming in. So I see that a lot of people seem familiar with the graveyard smash. So as folks are noticing, that is the Monster Mash. Wonderful. Some of the responses coming in for question A, we have a couple different responses there. A few folks that have the response Washington Irving. So that is the correct response there. Wonderful. So for D, some of the responses that we're getting, All Hallows Eve. So yes, that is definitely correct. Let's see, All Hallows Eve. So a couple of people have said Sam Hain as an alternate for Halloween as well. The other name that I was thinking of that I heard there that it doesn't seem like folks have mentioned is Kathy had All Saints Day. I think All Saints Eve was what I've heard for Halloween. Lots of responses coming in there. And one person, it looks like you got the correct answer to question B, and Julie said that she Googled the response. So yes, chicken feed apparently was the original name of candy corn. But I think Brian's alternate name of sugar also works there as well. So great, thank you all so much, wonderful. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jane Hammonds. I'm assistant professor in the university library. I am the teaching and learning engagement librarian. You can contact me at hammonds.73@osu.edu, and I'm always happy to hear from folks after the workshop, so please feel free to go ahead and email me if you do have any questions or comments. Some quick guidelines, please do check that you're muted. You can feel free to have your cameras on or off, that is up to you. Any questions, comments, go ahead and place those in the chat and we'll pause several times to take a look at that. We will be doing a poll, a Menti, and we're using the chat today. No breakout rooms. And I will send a follow-up email to everyone with all of the links and everything to today. So you don't have to worry about trying to write down lots of links as you're watching the workshop. So our goals here today are we're going to explore some definitions of social justice and information literacy to give us all a basis to build on. And then we're going to talk about where we see these two ideas or concepts as intersecting. And then hopefully provide some activities and resources that you can use when you think about teaching information literacy, teaching social justice, that you can use to accomplish those goals. So I would like to do a quick little poll just to get an idea of how familiar with everyone is with these concepts. With question 1, how would you rate your how would you rate your familiarity with the concept of social justice? And that's, is this something that you've done a ton of reading on? If you do work in this area, or, it's something that you still feel like you have a lot to learn. So I'll pop the poll up here and you can go ahead and put your responses in. So hopefully everyone should be able to see the poll now. So I'll give folks a chance to respond. So we'll give it 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Hopefully everyone is able to see the results now. So it looks like most folks do have some familiarity with social justice, and some folks that are very familiar with this. And then in terms of information literacy, it looks like maybe it's spread out a little bit more. A few more folks that are not really familiar with information literacy or only have more limited understanding of information literacy. So wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your responses there. I'm going to stop sharing that and go ahead and move on. So for the first part of the workshop, I just wanted to go over some definitions so that we all have a foundation to start from thinking about how these two concepts intertwine. So I would like us to do a little bit of collaborative definition building. And so we're going to do a Menti poll. And what I'd like you to do here is to share, a definition of social justice that you have, or an understanding of what it is to you. Or another way that you can think about this is, if you thought about a society that, was just, a socially just society, what would that look like to you? So I'm going to put the link here in the chat again for the Menti for everyone. And if you have any trouble accessing that, let me know. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can go out to the results there. And I'll give you all a chance to respond. Let's see here. Stop sharing. Okay, here we go. So I see some responses that are coming in. So as we're looking through, social justice is all people seen as people worthy, belonging, cared for, and welcomed. Social justice is equity and equality for human beings, providing access and opportunities that are equally available for all people, being proactive to mitigate and resolve inequities that have occurred in the past that have affected current systems that disadvantage historically marginalized people. Wonderful. Safety and security, access to healthcare, food, housing, education, and a sustainable environment. Equal distribution and access to resources for everyone. These are all such great responses. A society where we see equity in both opportunities and outcomes. Everyone is treated with equality and fairness in every situation. Just a couple more. A society in which barriers, discrimination, violence due to a person's community or social cultural identities does not exist. And recognizing, trying to correct historic and current inequality. So that's wonderful responses. Unfortunately, we don't have the chance to read all of those. Let's see, in a socially just society, certain groups of people would not be denied the opportunities and rights as everyone else. They would not be treated as outsiders. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your responses there. And we're going to try to go back to the presentation if we can. 1 second. All right. So hopefully you all are seeing the presentation again. If you're not, someone just give me a heads up. So just a few definitions that I found. This is from a book called Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. And what I really like here, they outline the idea of social justice as both a goal and a process. And the goal, as folks were saying in their response, is full and equitable participation of all people, right? And a process, the process to achieve this goal needs to be democratic, participatory, respectful, inclusive, affirming, capacity for change, working collaboratively with others to create change. Presentation is up, but not full screen. All right, hold on 1 second. I'm gonna stop sharing for a sec and bring that back up again. Sorry about that. It always so hard to get there. All right, 1 more second and we're almost there. All right, hopefully there we go. Should all be good now. Wonderful. All right, so that definition, they go on to talk about how their vision of the social justice world is one in which the resources are distributed equitably, ecologically sustainable, where people are safe and secure and recognized and treated with respect. And just a few things to highlight there in terms of resources. Talking about fair distribution of assets and keeping in mind that that's not just economic resources, but also that people have a say in what happens to them, and they have a say in their lives. They have the power to engage with and impact the institutions and the processes that are affecting their own lives. And I think a few people pointed to this in their comments as well, that this is also about, thinking about how we make changes, right? How do we reconstruct our society to make it more equitable, to make it more inclusive? So what do we do to eliminate those injustices that we know that exist and that have been created and are pervasive across our society? So that social justice is this goal, but it's also this process that's going to have to require, a willingness to change and to challenge the current system that it exists in order to make things more fair and equitable for everyone. This is another definition that I got from a United Nations document that just outlines sort of the things that folks have been saying. So equality and equity, and recognizing, with the difference between equity and equality, that it's not about necessarily treating everyone exactly the same, but recognizing that everyone is going to be in different places. People have different needs depending on who they are, where they start in life. And so giving folks the resources and the opportunities that they need depending on where they are, rather than saying that we're just going to treat everyone exactly the same. So when we think about education, this is the definition that they provide of social justice education. So if we think about our goals, how do we give people, how do we give our students, how do we give ourselves, our colleagues, how do we give others the awareness to know the injustices that exist, or to be able to examine these, to identify the causes? How do we make sure that folks have a sense of agency, that they think that they can make a difference, that they can change? How do we give people the skills, the tools that they need to take that process that can create that society? Let me see. So I wanted to just take a quick pause there after we've looked through a few quick definitions, and just see if there was any questions, comments, any aspects of the definition that folks have that were confusing or unclear to them, or that they resonate really strongly with them. So we'll let everyone have a few seconds to respond there. Pam asked, what is meant by moral rights? So I think that that was in contrast to specific legal rights, so that everyone would be treated equally under a system of justice, whereas moral rights would be more along the lines of the human rights. So the right to representation, the right to freedom of speech, those kinds of rights, as opposed to just a legal aspect, right? Hopefully that answers that question, Pam. Do you have a list of the definitions to refer to again? So I definitely will share the presentation with everyone, so that you can go back and access those at the end. Is there any specific definition that you wanted to look at again, Stephanie? If you do, just let me know. And Kate added, I like thinking of social justice as a process and a product, an ongoing goal. And I love that, right? And someone had mentioned in the comments that it's in their comments on the Menti, I saw just very briefly that it's not really like an achievable goal. And definitely there, it is something that is ongoing. It is a process. Absolutely. If you have other definitions that you would like to add, the worksheet that I shared with you all should be editable. I hope it will be. And down at the bottom of that, there is space if you wanted to add any additional definitions that you have there that you're aware of. Please feel free to go ahead and do that. So we'll give it just 10 more seconds to see if there are any additional questions or comments that pop up, and move on. Time is already moving so fast. Erica shared, addressing all members or groups is key. Yes, definitely. So now that the title of the workshop is Exploring Information Literacy and Social Justice. So we talked a little bit about what social justice is and what we mean by that term. So what do we mean when we talk about information literacy? I just wanted to briefly share, and I know that many of you are familiar with this and have seen this slide before, those that have attended previous workshops. But I did want to share for folks that may not have attended one of the previous workshops, or maybe a little bit less familiar with this term. So this is the definition of information literacy that is provided in the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education. which is a document that was produced by the Association of College and Research Libraries, which is a professional organization for academic librarians. And they define information literacy as the reflective discovery of information, understanding how information is produced and valued, and the use of information in creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. So what does that actually mean? We talk about information literacy as having three broad components. So skills or practices, such as the ability to effectively use a database. And previous definitions of information literacy that were commonly used, especially in the United States, were very skill-based and really had this emphasis that information literacy was about being able to find, evaluate, and use information. And so it is very kind of a straightforward process. And skills are definitely important, but this new definition of information literacy tries to acknowledge that being able to effectively engage with information requires a lot more, that you need to have conceptual understandings. So you need to have understandings of how information is produced, it's created, it's accessed, it's valued in our society to really be able to use information effectively. And you also have to have certain habits of mind or certain dispositions, such as a willingness to take the time that is needed to find accurate or authoritative information, such as an understanding of the need for patience and flexibility when you are searching for information. So we really emphasize that you can't just have, think about information literacy in terms of skills, that it is a broader sort of expanded understanding of information literacy. So the framework for information literacy actually highlights 6 core concepts that they outline that they think are important for students, for everyone, really, to understand in terms of information and how it's created and accessed and shared. And so one example is this idea that authority is constructed and contextual. So how important it is to understand that information sources have different levels of authority, and that there's a lot of components that go into why a source might be considered authoritative or not, what an authoritative voice is. That's not going to be the same in all contexts for all groups. Different communities, which could be different disciplines, will have different understandings of what an authoritative source might be, or who an authoritative voice might be, and that is contested. It's not always clear. So these are the example of these sort of broad understandings that folks need to have. We're going to talk about a couple of these a little bit more later on, but I do have descriptions of all of these on the handout for folks that are less familiar with those. If you have any specific questions about those, please let me know. But the basic point here is to try to really emphasize this idea that we want to think about information literacy as having an understanding of the information environment in which we are living. And that includes the processes of how information is valued, how it's created, understanding, how scholars work, how scholars engage with information, so that we have this sort of expanded understanding of information literacy. All right, so I'm going to pause there to check the chat, to ask any questions that folks have. And also, if you, with that sort of initial definition of information literacy, what kinds of connections that you might be starting to see thinking about social justice and information literacy. And these could be, of course, ideas that you already had as well coming in. So if anyone would like to share or feel comfortable sharing some initial connections that you're seeing, please go ahead and add those to the chat. And I see we do have a couple comments in there now, so go ahead and check those. So Kate shared, interesting how information can be used either maintain or change the state of the world. That is a great point, Kate, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. Wonderful. Kathy shared, I like the addition of habits of mind. Yes, you may know how to find good information, but if you don't have the disposition to do so. So some connections. So Jordan shared both involve critical thinking. Absolutely. So Tara shared information literacy involves understanding that information is constructed as the authority to produce information, right? So interrogates power dynamics behind who has the authority to produce valued information and works toward justice in information. That is a great response, Tara. Yes, so that interrogating that power. If we're thinking about information as being authoritative, then that automatically raises the question of, well, who says that that information is authoritative? What makes some people considered to be more authoritative than others? Who gets to determine what those voices are, who those people are, right? Absolutely. So Jenny shared both involve a set of meta-awareness, so zooming out to examine and interrogate the framework that you're working with. Some positives for Tara's comment. Yep, definitely was a great comment. Both are process oriented, both focus on the value, which can be impacted by personal perceptions. Such great responses. So Renee shared certain communities may not be able to produce information, or when they do, it is deemed not to have value. Yes, we think about information has value. To who, to whom, who is considered to be those valuable voices? Why are some voices not considered as valuable as others? When we assume that all students have the same understanding and skills surrounding investigating and analyzing information, we are neglecting to recognize the various backgrounds and identities students are bringing with them. Yes, the original definitions of information literacy treated students all the same, and it was very like mechanistic perspective of what students can do, and did not acknowledge the different backgrounds that students might be coming in with. Amy shared, I'm reflecting on value and social justice. People have value, and in information literacy, the information has value. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Everyone should have access to needed information, both require access to information. These are such great comments. Thank you all so much. Information literacy can be used to prove, for example, that one group is more deserving of another. Lots of power in there. That is a great comment, Michaela. Yes, we often do that, right? We prove that certain sources are more valuable than others. And as a result, that proves the point that we are trying to make. Wonderful. So thank you all so much for sharing those comments. Please feel free to continue to add more there. So I just wanted to dive into some of the connections that I'm seeing and that come up as we think about the framework for information literacy and sort of the history of this concept. Just checking the time to make sure we don't run out of time. So this is a comment from, and I know that this is a lot of text, and I apologize for that, from a librarian named Laura Sanders, who wrote a really great article on connecting information literacy and social justice. And someone mentioned in the chat, right? Information literacy is you can't have information literacy without access to information, right? If information literacy is about finding and evaluating and using and synthesizing information, you have to be able to access information in order to be able to exercise those skills. And you have to be able to have access to information in order to participate, right? So one of the key aspects of social justice that we talked about was the ability to participate, to make your opinion known, to have an impact on the world that is impacting you. And that you can't do that without having access to information. And one of the things that she points out really quickly when we think about information and access and how this connects to social justice, there's different levels of access that people need. Obviously, you need physical access to the materials. So you need to be able to actually find a book, or in our day and age, you need to be able to access the technology that you need to access the internet to find information. So you need, computers or phones or laptops, but you also need, internet access, which we know not everyone has. And then social access, and what she's talking about here is that depending on their sort of social network, some people have more or less access to information. Certain groups are more closed off to allowing information in or curate information very closely. Whereas other people have broader social networks that are able to link into more information from more different people from different areas. So depending on how broad or narrow your specific social network you might have more or less access. And then she also talks about the cognitive or intellectual access. So folks need to be able to make sense of the information that they are finding. They need the knowledge, the skills to be able to evaluate the information that they're seeing. And that requires a lot of understanding of those big picture things that we've been talking about, including things like the role of algorithms in determining the information that we get, or understanding how social media works and how that might be influencing the information that we get. So there's a lot of intersections there when we think about this. And information literacy as a concept has been around for a while. And there has been sort of social justice threads that have been going through thinking about how librarians have talked about information literacy. Sort of from the early ages of information literacy, this is one of the earlier conceptions of information literacy that was developed by the American Library Association. And this, it acknowledged right away this idea that even at that time, they were seeing a very fragmented information base, and they were recognizing that there's huge numbers of people who don't have access to information and other people who do have access to information. So they're seeing that split, and they're recognizing in this early definition that those that don't have that access are missing out on things. They don't have that ability to participate, to impact their society in the way that others do who have that access. But despite this sort of initial perception of the connection between social justice and information literacy, in the way information literacy tended to be taught, and as I mentioned, sort of the previous definitions of understanding of information literacy did not really reflect that at all. So one of the most dominant definitions of information literacy in the United States came from this document called the Information Literacy Competency Standards that came out in 2000. And this became incredibly influential for how librarians thought about and talked about information literacy. And it really had very limited social justice aspects at all. And in fact, it was very much about that straightforward process of finding, evaluating, and using information, a step-by-step, lockstep process that was going to be the same for all students and all disciplines, with all backgrounds. And it very much emphasized this idea of following law, following regulations. There was nothing in there at all that indicated that students should interrogate any concerns that there might be with the information environment, and with how power might be distributed within that environment. And nothing that said students should be taught to critically analyze that or to challenge anything. It was really just follow the rules and go through this step-by-step process. So a lot of folks were really concerned with that definition. And this is really where sort of leading into this idea of critical information as this concept started to develop among some librarians and other folks as well. Really emphasizing that information literacy has to include a component that takes into consideration power, and how power, the different factors that influence how information is produced and consumed. And so it can't just be focused on those specific skills, but it has to take that more broader critical perspective on information. And Lucky, of course, had to join the workshop today. So this is another definition of critical information literacy, right? So really emphasizing the need to consider those broader dimensions of information. Sorry, it's gonna knock my coffee over. To teach students, how do we teach students to critique how systems of power shape information? How do we get them to see that? And then how do we get them to think, this situation may not be fair. Maybe it's not fair that information costs so much that certain people can't access it, right? That a lot of information is locked away behind paywalls. and only really rich universities can afford to access that information. Getting students to see, hey, maybe there's a problem with that, and what is there something that we can do to change that? And so this definition of critical information literacy really was influential in some ways in the development of the framework for information literacy. And within the framework, as I mentioned, you do now start to see this idea that information literacy has to include this bigger understandings, so that students need to be able to recognize that there are barriers to entering conversations for people, to recognize that there are certain, authorities that are privileged, and there's systems that are privileged, and that people that for whatever reason can't learn the language of that system, they are not able to participate in that system. And that students really need to understand. So that was the scholarship as conversation frame. Information has value frame. This has several aspects where it really emphasizes that students need to understand that not everyone has the same access to information, that they need to think about what types of information privilege they might have. And it does at least give some acknowledgement that there may be a place to contest current practices around information, and that students maybe, make their own decisions about how they share their own information creations, for example. And then you also see this in the authority is constructed in contextual frame. So, question, why are certain things considered authoritative or not? In the academic context, why is there so much emphasis given on peer-reviewed sources as being authoritative? Whose voices are left out when that is the standard for being an authoritative voice? What other kinds of sources might be out there? So this is where you finally start to see now within information literacy, the framework, the guiding document, some of this social justice perspective coming through. So take a pause here to see if there are any questions, comments, thoughts on the connections that I've been highlighting around social justice and information literacy. And based on what I've been talking about with the framework, if you see anything that might be missing related to these connections. So give everyone a chance to respond, check the time. Let's see, Sarah showed, I love the breakdown of these in the areas of access. So yeah, I think it's really important to think about access very broadly as Laura Saunders says, and not that it's limited to physical access of materials. Kathy, I appreciate how the focus of this is on access. And Kate, not everyone is afforded higher education. So Brian shared who sets the etiquette for the 2000 definition, and then why does it change? So why the shift from the standards to the framework? The leadership of the Association of College and Research Libraries formed a committee to determine whether or not, based on some of the criticisms that were out there about the standards, they formed a committee that then created this new document that's the framework for information literacy, although it's not really new anymore. And I've mentioned this in previous workshops, that document itself among librarians has been contested in many ways as well. So it's really interesting, and I know that not everyone is librarian, so we don't want to go too deeply into the history of that, but if you have more questions about that, let me know. So Kate, still need to address how voices can be shared and heard, absolutely. A lost element, the concept needs to be more publicized. Jenny shared, I'm not sure how to address this, but missing information is a challenge. Yes. Kathy shared, in terms of social justice, I also see connections beyond access to advocacy and activism. Would this be a bonus component of the standards? Yes. So that's a great point. I think you all are hitting on some of the things that we're missing there. So Tara shared maybe an aspect to be focused on the use of information, so not just understanding, but considering justice and how to employ deeply it. Yes, you all are getting the concerns that are popping up there. So definitely, you know, a lot of folks were happy to see more of an emphasis on social justice, but there also were some concerns. Nowhere in this guideline of information literacy in higher education is the word social justice actually mentioned. And you know, there were a lot of discussions among the group that created this about whether or not it should be there or not, and they ended up leaving it out. And so one of the things that you see that folks have been pointing to in their comment is they talk a lot about awareness and understanding, but they don't talk as much about action, right? They don't talk about that process as much. It's about the understanding, that first part of it, but you know, not the steps to actually go ahead and do something to make those changes. So be aware, you know, of, you know, the challenge, the problems that come with the traditional notions of granting authority, but they don't really go beyond that. And one of the things I think you also see this coming out in the comments as well is academic, sort of accepted academic cultural practices, I think, are still reinforced within this document, because it really emphasizes this idea of what experts know about research versus what novices know about research. And it really, even in the end, it has some questioning, but in the end, I think it really does reinforce in a lot of ways sort of traditional academic practices. So a lot of those concerns are there. Let's see, some comments coming in. Amy shared, I'm coming off as a healthcare perspective when my students are patients and family coming to me for care. So information literacy and social justice is always about access and the power differential. Who has the knowledge and who wants needs the info? Yes, great comment. So Brian shared, social justice is a hot button term nowadays. Using it might alienate a large group of people before they read the rest of the framework. That is a great comment, Brian. And I do think that that was one of the concerns about why it ended up being left out. But that, of course, then creates concerns about some librarians feel that librarianship and libraries should be completely neutral. But others feel that libraries need to take a more active step and not be afraid to create those controversies. But I think that that's a really great point about why maybe that was left out. Is information ever neutral? Great question, Amy. I don't think so, but folks may have other responses there. Wonderful. So based on these criticisms, one of the librarian that I mentioned earlier, Laura Saunders, she proposed a new frame, a new concept that to be added to this framework. And I will emphasize that this has not officially been added, but I did want to share this as an option of what this might have looked like or might look like in the future if this is added to our understanding, our definition of information literacy. So information being that, you know, recognizing information is created within existing power structures. Hold on one second. I kind of knock at the door. I'm gonna hope it's just a delivery and I'm gonna ignore it. So information is created within these power structures and how power influences the distribution and dissemination of information. And so that students have to do this. Users, everyone has to do this. Hold on one second. So I don't know why who's knocking at the door, but apologies, that never happens. So in thinking about what this might look like, Laura Saunders lays out some of the specific sort of actions or practices, knowledge practices that we would want to see in folks so that they would be able to understand the commodification of information, that they would, as someone mentioned in the chat, that they would recognize missing information, you know, when those voices are missing, when they're incomplete. They would understand, folks mentioned this earlier as well, how information can be used and used, you know, for positive and negative reasons, to misinform, to coerce, right? So in addition to this, they also, she also raises some of the dispositions or habits of mind, so that students would be very questioning, you know, questioning those traditional sources of knowledge, questioning those traditional publication practices, what makes something authoritative or not. And that last one I think is really important based on what we've been talking about, that they would feel empowered to be able to work for change. So it's not just, going beyond that questioning or that understanding, but actually thinking about how they can make changes. Right? So again, I want to emphasize that this is not like an official part of the framework for information literacy, but I wanted to offer it as an option for thinking about the directions that this might go and the kinds of things that we might want our students to be doing or thinking about or reflecting on as they're engaging with information, and that we would want to be as well when we are engaging with information. So I'll pause again really quickly there before we have just a few minutes to go through some activities or resources that might be helpful to folks. Let's see. So Jenny shared neutral, perhaps that equals status quo. The Dornack has, who can it be now? Yes. So Tara shared the proposed frame is super useful for my class on equity and justice in higher education. Wonderful, wonderful, Tara. Yeah, I think it's a really great way to start thinking about this concept. And one of the things that the creators of the framework emphasize is that it's meant to be a living document and it's meant to grow and change. And so, I say, if you find that frame helpful, if you find those concepts and dispositions helpful and things that you want to incorporate into your teaching, go ahead and do so, right? There's no reason why it has to be, that the ACRL is going to tell us what only is information literacy and what is not. Instead, I think that's helpful for me thinking as a librarian, so I'm going to incorporate and use that into my thinking, even if it's not officially part of the framework. Okay, so really quickly, just to go through some teaching activities and resources. I just saw one comment come in. Well, great, Sarah, wonderful, glad it's really be helpful. So I think a revised framework should acknowledge the importance of art, music, stage to authoritative information. That is a great point. I love that, Kate. We tend to focus very significantly on traditional scholarly forms of information. And we know that there are so many different other types of information out there, including art, music, stage. Wonderful. Yeah, I love that. So teaching activities and resources. I just want to highlight really quickly that I know thinking about how to teach these things in a class is really challenging. We often have very limited time with students. For librarians, we might often have only one shot with students. But even if we're teaching full semester classes, we know that we have so much to cover that, trying to think about how to incorporate all of this can be really challenging. So completely understand that. And that's why the activities that I'm going to do hopefully are ones that could be managed within a one class session for the most part. Really quickly, pop quiz, just to get us thinking about different types of activities. So which of the following topics do you think has the most coverage on Wikipedia? A, female poets from Africa, B, American college football, or C, Native American scientists? Give just 10 seconds to respond to that. And I see that we have a pretty significant agreement on what the right answer to that one is, right? So American college football. Yeah. So just to kind of show this, I did a really quick little experiment. So I looked up Native American scientists, but I know this is probably hard to see. But the Native American scientist category, there were 2 subcategories, and there were 20 people listed that have pages for Native American scientists. If we compare that to college football, there are 25 subcategories associated with college football in the United States. And if we look at one of those subcategories, there are, went really quickly too. I know it's hard for you all to see this, but there are 967 categories associated with college football coaches in the United States. And 158 Ohio State Buckeyes football coaches have their own Wikipedia pages. So if we compare that to the 20 Native American scientists that had pages that I were able to find there. All right, so I think that this is a really interesting example of the type of assignment that you could do with students. Using Wikipedia, a resource that they're really familiar with already, and getting them to start thinking about, what Wikipedia represents and who it doesn't represent, what voices are missing from Wikipedia. There's some great readings in there talking about, how much of Wikipedia is written by, a North American or Western white male audience, and that there are so many people and groups and organizations that are not listed there because they are not part of a group that those people would traditionally write about. So having students to identify and reflect and compare on who is being represented in this and who is not. And are you someone, unless you have a Wikipedia page. One of the examples they give is, of a scientist who wins an award, but happens to be a woman, and she doesn't have a page, and it's kind of like an embarrassment to realize that she's won this major award, but that she doesn't have her own page. So great example of an assignment that you could do there. Another assignment that I wanted to share, and this was found through Quora, which is the community of online research assignments. So it was developed by another librarian. His name was Liz Bellamy. Thinking about inclusive citation practices. So again, thinking about those whose voices are missing, whose voices are continually listed as being authoritative. So there's a couple great readings there on inclusive citations and understanding the gender gaps in citations or representation gaps in citations, who tends to get cited a lot, who doesn't, and having students start to think about the sources that they are using in their own papers or the sources that they're using in other papers. If they don't feel comfortable doing their own, sharing an article with them and having them look at the actual authors. I think students oftentimes they see those and they don't really think about that they're actually people behind those citations. And having them look at those and analyze and think about the dynamics of who is being cited in that article and who is not, and whose voices might be missing. So I think that's a great example assignment that folks could do. And this is an exercise that Mahabali shares that anyone can do this, obviously. Just think about name 10 scholars in your field that you know that are not white or that are not men. Or if you name the top 10 scholars in your field, who are they? And thinking about this as an exercise, thinking about your own reading and your own reading list and how those might be expanded to include more diverse representations and more voices out there. And these are just some resources, and these are all shared on the handout, but there's different places where you can go to start to identify works and scholarly works or research by by different groups of people. So Cite Black Women, for example. I've included a few like Google lists that are going around that I was able to find for BIPOC authored resources or guidance on how you can find diverse voices. But this is a challenge, and we've talked about this in some other groups that I've been with. We want to find those diverse voices, but we often don't know where to look, and we don't know how to identify who that might be. So if you have additional resources that you know of that are helpful for finding those diverse voices, please feel free to go ahead and add those to that handout. So thinking about sort of challenging the existing system that we live in, especially with copyright and how restrictive copyright laws are, and thinking about ways that you can encourage your students to incorporate materials that have been created and are licensed openly, and thinking about helping students to consider how they can license their own material openly, and obviously giving them the choice. We don't want to force someone to license their creative work in a way that feels uncomfortable to them. But at least giving them the option to think about understanding, using Creative Commons or other types of open licensing agreements for their own creative works that they have. So here's again, just a bunch of resources. Again, these are all on there where students can learn more about Creative Commons, learn how to share their work there, learn how to find openly licensed resources. So the Creative Commons search, the image searches here, music searches that are available. I shared a few at the end on how you can find diverse stock photos So if you're giving a presentation or something and you're looking for diverse photos, you can use those resources as well. So having students think, especially if you are working with students that are at the point where they are ready to publish or to share their resource, comparing their publication options, considering thinking about proprietary journals versus open access journals and when they might want to use those. So having students, giving them one specific information source and having them reflect on the value of that source to a variety of different people, but also reflect on who profits from that source, what that source costs, what that cost might create a barrier to those people, to certain people. So kind of leading discussions like this, I think could be really helpful. I think this might be the last one. And some people might be familiar with this slide, but giving students assignment and limiting the specific resources that they are allowed to use to complete that assignment so that some groups have more access than others. And then coming back together and talking about, what they were able to do or not do with the specific access that they were granted and how that, might have left certain people out or gave them incomplete knowledge to be able to complete what their task was. So I know that was a really quick run through. Oh, there's one more last one. Oh, yeah. So just a few assignments here on having students think about who is represented, especially thinking about algorithms and how they control what we see and don't see. So I know we're out of time here, so I just wanted to share those really quickly. So I'm gonna stop there. That was a really quick run through. So if you do have any questions, comments, I'm going to check the chat in just a second, but please feel free to go ahead and add those. If there are things that you think are relevant, please go ahead and share those. I just wanted to share really quickly that we have a new instructor resources site available, and I'll send the link to that to everyone. And we also have an upcoming event. This is not one of the workshops in this series, but there is going to be an upcoming discussion that the library is leading on citation practices and reconsidering how we teach citations and plagiarism. So if you're interested in that, I'll go share the link for that as well for everyone. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and check the chat and see the comments that are coming in. All right. So Brian shared, I'm curious how the framework interacts with current global governmental issues, EU's right to be forgotten laws, various privacy laws, China forcing internet filtering. That's a great question, Brian. It's a really big question, comment. I would love to talk more about that, but I don't know if we have time to really jump into all of that here. So Brian, Nicholas shared, the social justice framework has great concepts to get students thinking about, but I share the frustrations at the lack of actionable ways to remove accessibility barriers. It seems more on instructors to accommodate and inform rather than the systems to create change. Yes, it's often at that individual level, whereas we know that individuals can change, but there has to be something broader that happens as well. Kate shared, seminal works are seldom authored by people on the fringes of society. Excellent point. Tara, I love these resources. Teaching a preparatory seminar and going to incorporate these. Wonderful. I'm so happy, Tara. Stephanie was agreeing with Kate. Academia reinforces the stereotypes within many of our highly ranked journals. Definitely. Once certain people get cited, they get cited over and over again. And lots of people who are just completely left out, their voices are just not heard. Right, thank you all, thanks so much. I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording, but I will stick around for a few minutes in case there's any additional questions or comments or thoughts that folks have.